following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Alan Blumkin. I'm here with my good friend David Nemec for another session of David Nemec's baseball history and trivia. Today we're going to discuss baseball during World War II. Welcome, David.
Pleasure to be with you again, Al.
Okay. Since you're probably bigger authority on this stuff than I am, would you like to start?
Yeah, I wouldn't call myself an authority, but I definitely have always been interested in it. The years 42 to 45, those 4 seasons I would classify as all wartime seasons. And I remember as a kid, there was an ad in the Sporting News, send in $1 and you can get 3 back copies of Spalding baseball guides. It'll be brand new condition, but they're older, and pick the 3 years you want. And I picked 42, 43, 43, 44, and 45. And I got them shipped to me, and I didn't realize when I opened the envelope, I thought I was going to get 40, 45, 44, and 43 seasons. And I opened the 45 guide, and I saw it was the 44 season. So it was kind of a junior moment. I learned that, the baseball guides, the year they were dated, actually encompassed the seasons previously.
Yeah.
And but I devoured them. And 44 season was fascinating to me in that season, I think probably for the only time in organized baseball history, it not only went through Class D, but there was a Class E league very briefly.
No.
Great Lakes League. Do you know anything about it? Have you heard about it?
No, it's the first I've ever heard of this.
Yeah, it only lasted for a couple of weeks, but there were a couple of names, and I don't remember whom offhand, but guys who went on to, they played in the minors, at least the minors, and they were names to be, remembered with them. But mostly it was the minor league seasons I was interested in, and the major league seasons, of course, too. And it was mostly guys by 44 who were 4F or 1A. 1A meaning they were possible candidates to be mustered into the service at some point.
Yeah, I know, because I was one of those I was one of those during Vietnam.
Yeah.
It's a long story, which I won't bore anybody with. Yeah.
Yeah, but it's not boring, but at all. But it was a fact, and there were guys, of course, like Pete Gray, who only had one arm, and he was playing in 44 with Memphis and had a great year, and was the Southern Association MVP, and went on to play with the Browns in 45, which was kind of a sad story because the Browns picked him up. They'd won the pennant in 44, and I don't think they really expected a whole lot out of him other than he would be a curiosity, attract fans, and they didn't get much out of him. He really was, even against wartime pitching, pretty badly overmatched.
We had a player by the name of Babe Martin at the St. Louis Browns St. Louis Browns panel at the 1992 Sabre Convention, which was in St. Louis, and he said that they teammates hated Gray. They blamed him for losing the pennant in 1945, and he was extremely standoffish. He didn't have a friend in the clubhouse.
Yeah, Gray was a kind of an introvert. He had problems with alcohol. I don't think he ever felt comfortable. I once may have had a conversation with Pete Gray. I'll never know now whether I actually did or not, but I had a good friend and colleague in San Francisco, Tony Salin, who was a member of Sabre off and on for a number of years. And Tony was the kind of guy, he'd never tell you how he did it, but he would get phone numbers of ball players and addresses of ball players. And out of the blue, he would think nothing of calling up a guy. And in '98, I had an occasion to call him up and said, "Tony, is there any chance you can make a call to Pete Gray? Do you have anything on Pete Gray? Is he even still alive?" And Tony looked up and said, "Yeah, he's still alive, and I do have an old phone number for him." So I went over to Tony's house. I lived in San Francisco near Ocean Beach, and he picked up the phone and he said, "I don't know if this number still works or not. This is an old number." And he said, it's not Pete Gray's number per se, but it's the number of a bar where I talked to him. I think I talked to him anyway. So he said, "It's Pete Gray," a couple of years ago, and he called the number and talked to whoever bartender answered and said, is Pete Gray happen to be around? And apparently Gray was, or a guy claiming to be Gray was, and he came on the phone and talked to us. And I wanted to ask Gray one particular question. And because I've been in the 44 guide, I had noticed early on in life, when I bought these guides as a kid, there was a pitcher named Boyd Tepler who had a fantastic half season with Nashville in the Southern Association, and Gray was with Memphis. I wanted to see if Gray remembered him and had batted against him. And, so when Gray came on the phone, I said, "Pete," and this kind of gravelly voice came on. It possibly was him. And I said, "Do you remember a pitcher named Boyd Tepler?" And he said, Tepler. And I said, "Yeah, he was with Nashville in '44 when you were with Memphis." "Oh, yeah, Tepler. Yeah, I remember him." I said, what did you think of him? How'd you do against him?" "Oh, yeah, I could hit him. Well, it so happens I got together with Tepler a year or so later on the phone and asked him about Pete Gray, and he said, "Yeah, Gray could hit the ball. He got the ball and play off me, which is more than most guys did." And actually, I looked it up. I just looked it up in the last few months, and it turns out Gray did go 1 for 3 against Tepler in '44. But the war was full of guys like that. Not only Pete Gray, but Bert Shepard, and there were, guys who came up from the minors after, a guy like Chuck Hostetler, who hadn't played in the majors for like 20 years, and Paul Schreiber.
Yeah, there were a number of players, because years ago, Scott Flail and I did try to do a look-up on players who had 10 years, at least 10 years between major league appearances, and there were a number of them who became active during World War II. The best book I've read on this was a book by William Meade. It came out a bunch of years ago, and the title of it was Even the Browns.
Yeah.
And it discussed it and revolved around the Browns winning the AL pennant for the first and only time in 1944.
That was an excellent. That is an excellent book, and I still got that, and I reread it every couple of years because it does have stuff in it that. And I wish he, but I don't know if he did any other books. I haven't seen them if he has.
He did one on 2 spectacular seasons, which was 1930 and 1968, because 1930 was the epitome of hitting, and 68 was the opposite. But one of the great quotes that came out of there that I think Larry Ritter put in his biography of Paul Wainer and Glory of Their Times was Wainer was at the end of his career, and he was in the Yankee outfield. So before some game, some fan yelled at Wainer. He said, "Wainer, what are you doing out here?" He said, "DiMaggio's in the Army."
Yeah, I think he played through 45 with the Yankees. Yeah. And I don't know if he probably got his 3,000th hit during.
No, 1940. He got that in 1942. Because I remember when,
42 is,
when I got worked up about Musial getting his 3,000th hit in 1958. It hadn't been done in 16 years. So he got that hit in 1942.
Okay, so so Wayner was the last one. So Wayner did hang on and then through the Warriors. And I just looked up Hostetler, and he was a 40-year-old rookie in 1944, and he hit 298, played 90 games, no power. He had 9 doubles, 2 triples, and 265 at bats, but. He was a decent player, and he played a little bit in 45. I don't know if
wasn't he the one that fell down on the bases in the 45 World Series?
I remember
he tripped over third base or something like that.
Possible. Yeah. He would have been 41 then, if he was
that's why I know that. Even know the name. Yeah.
I could look it up. Let's see if he did. Yeah, he postseason. He got three pinch hit at bats. I don't think he's the guy though, because he went 0 for 3. But I do remember
he was may have been a pinch runner. But the thing is also, Sabre came out with a bunch of years ago with a book of biographies on wartime players. Like the one that struck me was Mickey Rocco. Yeah, he was Stigma's first baseman during the war. Yeah, and then these guys were career minor leaguers. They weren't guys that just popped up out of nowhere off the sandlots or anything. They'd been buried away for a long time, and some of them came up and got a chance that would not have come to them under ordinary conditions, and one that certainly took advantage of it when it came his way, and was nothing was really expected of him except he just could have fell in. Was Eddie Stanky, and without wartime baseball, I don't think anybody today in baseball would remember the name Eddie Stanky. I think he came up in 44 with the Cubs, and 45. He was traded to Brooklyn pretty quickly. Yeah, what happened? I asked. Obviously, years and years ago, I asked Eddie Gold why they traded Stanky to the Dodgers. He came up in 43, and 44 they traded him for a pitcher by the name of Bob Chipman, who I knew about because he was a top baseball card in 52. Yes. And he said the reason that they traded Stanky was they had a second baseman named Don Johnson, who was a very, very hot prospect. So they traded Stanky to make room for Johnson, and Johnson never really amounted to much.
I don't think he was a prospect. I think Johnson, if I'm not mistaken, Don Johnson was an older. It was I could be wrong. I am going to look him up because I know he did replace Stanky.
And he was the Cub authority of all time. He
wrote books Johnson on them, was another guy who got his break during the war.
Yeah.
He came up in 43 with the Cubs. He was already 31 years old. Yeah, but they looked upon Johnson as a better ball player than Stanky. That's for sure, because he did have a good year in 45. He had 302, and they kept him for a couple of years after the war. So he had a pretty good career, and there were quite a number of guys like that who came up for 1 or 2 years, and some of them had pretty good seasons, and it put a different quality of baseball on display for most major league fans. That was for certain. But Allie Reynolds came up during the war with Cleveland. I don't know if he would have gotten a chance either. He'd been
Wopak came up with the White Sox.
Yeah. We can probably find at least a dozen guys who wouldn't have gotten a chance, who proved to be pretty good ball players after the war, and without that wartime opening, probably we never know their names today.
Somebody asked me once who led the major leagues in RBIs in the 40s, and I said Bob Elliott.
Yeah.
And I said he wasn't in the war.
That's right.
Yeah. I had doubts about. I got into a discussion about at least 30 years ago, about Bobby Dorr, because he played all 3 seasons during the war.
No, I don't think he's been playing 45. I don't think. I think at 45 he was.
Musial didn't play in 45. Musial played in 43 and 44.
Yeah,
because the St. Louis teams, for some reason, the draft wasn't as, it wasn't as. I'm trying to find a word.
Well, it wasn't as invasive.
Thank you. Invasive in St. Louis as it was in the rest of the country. So, the Browns won the pennant, and the Cardinals were the National League powerhouse during the war.
Yeah, they were, and the 44 series, it would have been It would have been a subway series if St. Louis had any kind of transportation that went underground, but they never.
Well, also, it was the last series played in the St. Juan ballpark.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, it would have been fun. Yeah, I was a kid. I went to my first game during the war in 42.
I was 1.
Yeah, and I was too young to appreciate that I was at a baseball game, and I remember just running. I was at Old League Park in Cleveland, and I was just running around, and my father tried to keep me in my seat and couldn't do it. Kept telling me, they're playing the Yankees, Bill Dickey's here, and I had no idea who anybody was, or even who the Yankees were. Just was trying to find other kids to play with, and I didn't appreciate what I got. But
the Yankees lost Henrik, I think, in August of 42. And, of course, the 2 big ones that Feller enlisted the day after Pearl Harbor, and Hank Greenberg. They had a draft in 1941, and military draft, and Hank Greenberg was one of the first drafted. He missed almost all the 41 season, and then he was discharged 2 days before Pearl Harbor, and the day after Pearl Harbor, he re-enlisted.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Feller enlisted quickly, too.
Yeah. And Feller was asked a number of times, are you upset that you didn't get 300 wins because of serving in the Navy? He said no. He always said no.
Yeah, he did. I did. I actually asked him that question, and when the convention was in Cleveland in 2008, he was there, and that was the only time I really got to meet him. I had, as a kid, I'd gotten his autograph after a game, but I didn't really get to talk to him. But there I got to talk to him in Cleveland a little bit because F. Cope knew him well, and Cope introduced me to Bob, and we spent some time together. But yeah, he was kind of my idol as a kid. He was my first idol with the Cleveland team, and then Boudreaux became a replacement for him, and so especially after the 48 season. But it was really great to see. Boudreaux did play during the war because his ankles were so bad that they wouldn't take him, and he won a batting title, and it really was the last authentic batting title won by a Cleveland Indian, a member of the Cleveland Ball Club. They're not the Indians anymore, of course, but I wish they were. And but Vila's title in '54 was tainted in that by today's rules it would go to Ted Williams, and Boudreaux was the last really authentic, bona fide Cleveland batting title winner, and that's 56, 23 is 79 years ago. And all that time, no threat, no present day Indian is even a remote threat to win a batting title. And the
last one was Avila, right?
Yeah, well, Avila in '54, and Francona was a contender in '59.
Yeah, he didn't have the at-bats,
He didn't have the at-bats, and if they'd had the rule that they had in '54 in place, I think Joe Gordon would have played him more toward the end of the season after Cleveland was out of contention, and would have gotten him well over 400 at bats. But it still wouldn't have been enough because by that time I think they'd already put in the rule you had to have over 500 and some plate appearances. And McMahon was too far short of it to make a run at the very end of the season. Yeah, he rode the bench.
Well, it was 3.1 times at bat per game, and what was 154 games, it was 477, and when it went to 162 games, it became 502.
So 477. Well, he came pretty close, and it wouldn't have taken too much more for.
Yeah, because Williams in 1954 walked over 100 times. He had I think 345 official at bats.
Yeah, and I know he would have qualified under the the rule by the end of the decade.
Yeah,
but
you had Vern Stevens became a star during the World War II. For the Browns. Yeah, he led the league in RBIs. And you know who are I looked this up a while ago. You know, led the American League in total bases in 1944 was Johnny Lindell. Yeah. He
had a lot of triples that year.
Yeah.
And never and the batting titles. Cabaretta won in 45. Dixie Walker, I think, won in 44.
44. Musial won in 43.
Musial in 43. And Musial was, Boudreaux won in 44. 45 was Snuffy Sternweiss hitting 309.
Yeah.
And on the last day you won it on the last day of the season, and the guy who could have beaten him out if he'd gotten either one less at bat or one more hit, I think, was Tony Cuccinello. And Cuccinello never played a game after the 45 season. The White Sox had a whole infield full of guys who were as good as through as soon as the last pitch was thrown. In 45, they had Leroy Schalk at second base, Cuccinello on third, and they had Hal Trotsky on first. And I think Appling wasn't on short. Cass Michaels played, I think, short most of 44. He was only about 19 years old then, but Appling was gone. Sure.
Trotsky might have been a Hall of Famer if it wasn't for the migraines.
Yeah, I don't know.
That wrecked his career, yeah.
It did wreck his career, but he would have been, because he played during the 1930s when all those guys with their stats were elevated because of the people who were on the old timers committee then. Guys like Travis Jackson made the Hall of Fame, and Chick Hafey, who in any other era, they were just good ball players. And really bottom league.
Those named two Frankie Frisch, two of the Frankie Frisch.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, I think, can you discuss Hal Newhouser?
Yeah,
everybody thought was. Yeah.
Yeah, Newhouser was Newhouser came up with the Tigers before the 44 senior. Newhouser had a heart murmur, and he was 4F, and he pitched he was with the Tigers in the 41 season, the 40 season when they won the pennant, 42 into 43. 43 started to come on a little bit. 44, it was out of sight. I mean, and then 45, was it 45 he won 29 games or 44? I think he won 29 games in 44 maybe. And could have won if he won a 30th game, it would have really meant something. He'd be the last left-hander, of course, to have done it. Instead it's Lefty Grove. But as it is, Newhouser really was a good pitcher. And he had a bad shoulder, which nobody really realized. And he was throwing he'd been overused. He was overworked. In 46, he was right there with Feller in 46 in strikeouts and wins and everything. And could have.
Yeah, a big year in 48, then everything started to go south. But his pitching after World War II was for several years pretty good.
It was good. It was good. It was clear that this was a guy who wasn't a wartime freak. He was legitimately a good ball player. I'm sure he wouldn't have won 29 games there hadn't been a war intervention, and the regular players had been around and during the war. But I would have been good, I think, for 20 wins, in all those seasons. And the Tigers wouldn't have been a good team, but they would have had Greenberg on top of, Newhouser and Trout, and they would have had Barney McCoskey still through the war too. They would have been a contender right straight through the war. Newhouser was definitely not a wartime freak, and Vern Stevens wasn't either, for that matter. I mean, those are guys that were. Cavaretta and Dixie Walker probably are two guys who benefited as much as anybody from playing during the war. I mean, I don't think Dixie Walker would have been a batting title contender under normal conditions. I don't think Cavaretta ever would have either, for that matter. And neither made the Hall of Fame, fortunately, because I don't think they belong there. But there were guys, during the war you would have thought would have taken real advantage. And two of the big names were Ducky Medwick and Mel Ott. And Medwick had decent seasons, but nothing great. And
Medwick was never really the same after he got beamed.
Yeah.
In 1941, I think it was.
Yeah. Before he was traded by the Cardinals.
That was right after he went to the Dodgers. Cardinal pitcher beamed him, and Larry McPhail was so
Bob
crazy. And McPhail actually ran out to the field.
Yeah, that was bad. But Mel Ott was there during the war and didn't do anything special. I never quite understood why Ott had such poor stats during the war. But I don't think if Ott hadn't played in the Polo Grounds, I don't know that he'd be a memorable name today. I think that short right field porch. I think that he learned to he had lifted his right foot and just tried to.
There was a book that came out, a biography of him that came out about 30 years ago, and they broke down his home road. Outside of home runs, the splits weren't bad. It wasn't anything like Chuck Klein and Baker Ball, who hit 390 in Baker Ball and 220 everywhere else. I'm exaggerating there, but also one of the trivia questions I made up, I didn't put it out there when I was running the trivia because it would have been impossible for 99% of the people to get. The first pitcher ever to win a World Series game without winning a game in the regular season.
Well, that was Trucks, wasn't it?
Yeah. It's been done once since a relief pitcher on the Red Sox in 1986 named Steve Crawford won the second game of that World Series.
Yeah.
But Triad, because both teams, I think the Tigers and the Cubs, who played the 1945 World Series, were given special dispensation to add, 3 players onto the World Series roster who had been just recently discharged, and Trucks was one of them.
Yeah. And I think Clyde McCullough was one for the Cubs, and that continued into '46, where I think the World Series rosters were up a lot. They include as many as 30 players, because the rosters that season were, I think, increased, if I'm not mistaken, for almost the entire season to encompass all the players coming back from the war. If you came back from the war and you had your last contract was with a major league team, they had to take you back and give you a chance. And,
there was a suit over that.
Yeah, there was. Tony Lupien.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was. And there were a lot of guys who protested. There was a guy named Whitey Platt, who, I know his career pretty well. Platt had been with the Cubs in '44 early in the season, then he'd been farmed out to Nashville, but then he was called back to the Cubs late in the season. And '43, and he was runner-up for the batting crown to Ed Sauer, Hank Sauer's brother, and both of them were in the Cubs chain. And Sauer had this, I don't know what it was, 4F or 1A, but Sauer kept playing, and Platt went off to the Navy in 44 and 45. He came back in 46, and he thought he had his job guaranteed, and the Cubs put him up on waivers. And Platt put up a fight, and the White Sox picked him up, fortunately for baseball, because Platt was ready to carry that suit to court. And the White Sox, they waived him after the season. Platt never was the player he had been before the war, but that guy had real potential. And
Lupian collaborated with a book by Lee Lowenfish years ago, and it was the first book that ever discussed the history of baseball labor relations.
Yeah. Lupian was a pretty smart guy. And he was not a bad ball player. I mean, he played during the war. He played, first base for the Phillies, and and another guy who really whose career took off during the war was Nick Etten with the Yankees.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Etten had been with the Phillies prior to the war, and wasn't going anywhere. The Phillies were ready to get rid of him, and the Yankees picked him up, and he led the American League in homers at least once during the war. And Stevens won it once, and maybe I don't know. I don't even know who the third winner was. Maybe Stevens won 2 or Etten won 2. I don't remember, but the totals were very low. I don't think anybody even hit 30 homers in a season during the war. I don't think so. I think the totals are all in the 20s. If I'm right.
They had something called the below the ball, because the rubber that was used to make the baseballs,
that was
used
so
for
bad.
the war effort. And so the balls. I remember reading about this ball they called the below the ball, which is very, very hard to hit, that they used during the war.
Yeah, they took it off. They had to take it off because they started I think it was the 43 or 44 season with it.
Yeah.
And nobody could hit the ball out of the park. There weren't any homers, very low scoring games. And finally, Major League Baseball, Landis, understood that this wasn't going to fly, and they put regular balls back into play. But I don't think those balls were the balls that were used prior to the war or after the war. I think they were still deadened somewhat, because the home run totals. Tommy Holmes led in 45 homers in the National League, and Holmes was not a home run hitter. And after the war, I doubt that he even had double figures, but 45, you'd think he led the National League in home runs with like 25 or something like that.
And one of the real interesting things that came out of wartime baseball was in, I think, 1945, the Washington Senators had 4 knuckleball pitchers of their starting rotation.
You remember who they were?
Dutch Leonard,
Roger
Wolf,
Niggling,
John Niggling,
Pete Appleton.
Mm.
Yeah, and they almost won the pennant. 45. Then they put their schedule out. They purposely ended the season early in Washington so that the Redskins could play home games, or NFL Redskins could play their home games early in the season, because the Redskins were supposed to have a good team. Sammy Baugh was coming back.
Yeah, they wound up going to the championship game in 1945. They lost to the Cleveland Rams.
Yeah, when Baugh hit the goalpost.
Yeah.
On a pass from the end zone and gave Cleveland a safety. Those were the winning points. And in the 45 season, their schedule was over. It was done. And they had to just watch helplessly while the Browns and the Tigers were both still in contention for the pennant, and they had no control whatsoever of their own fate. But they had lost a key game against the A's earlier before the season ended, when an outfielder named Bingo Binks went out took the field without his sunglasses and lost an easy fly ball in the sun, and the A's, who won very few games, won the game, and that proved to be the crucial game. If Washington won the game, I think they would have ended up in a tie for the pennant and had a playoff game, if I'm not mistaken. Trying to remember who the guy that hit the fly ball was. It was a guy named Ed somebody with the A's, and the guy, yeah, it's weird, but I can't remember who it was. Yeah, but anyway.
Another pitcher that was fairly successful during the war and really didn't do much afterwards was Hank Borowy.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he was only the
Why did the
second
Yankees
guy.
sell him? Why did the Yankees sell him in the middle of the season to the Cubs? That's something I could never put my arms around.
You know, I never read. Yeah, I tried to find that out too. I never did. You're right. And you being from New York, if anybody could find it out, it would be you. And if you can't find that out, it's probably not there. And no, that's a good question because I mean, Borowy was a decent pitcher, but he wasn't a 20-game winner, and he never came close to the war.
Well, he won 10 for the Cubs, Yankees, and 11 for the Cubs. So he did win 21 that year. Another Yankee pitcher who's very overlooked, who became a star during the war, was Spud Chandler.
Yeah. Well, Chandler had some pretty good years. He was still good through 47. You know, he didn't pitch that much, but
I know, yeah.
He was still, you know, I remember him, and I never saw him, but I know that he had a pretty good rep in Cleveland as you know, a good pitcher, and but then 45 season. That's when Ferris came up.
Houston.
And Texas.
Houston.
Yeah, and it was crazy. It was crazy, but yeah.
But you know, most of the big stars, you know, Greenberg missed all 41. He missed basically more than 4.5 years when he came back to the Tigers in late 45 and hit the home run that basically won the pennant for them. The fellow came back in 45, won 5-3.
And he did, but in 46 he did. It did look like he was through. I mean, he did have. I think the guy that was out, the guy that hit the ball was Ernie Tisch. That was the guy who hit the fly ball.
Yeah.
I might be wrong, but I'm just recalling that name. And the Binks missed, but 46. You know, Greenberg had a good season. Led the American League in home runs, and I don't know if he was up there.
Home runs and RBIs. Yeah, they let him go, and he finished up in 47 with the Pirates. He's a mentor to Ralph Kiner.
Yeah, he was.
But you look at him, and he missed. I think he played 12 games in 1936 because of a broken wrist, which he hurt in the 35 World Series, and he missed. 4.5 years during the Second World War.
Did he break that in the series, or did he break that against the Yankees?
I know he broke it in the series, and he may have rebroken it.
Yeah, because there's a game against the Yankees, and that Yankees guy, that outfielder who really had a bad rep.
Jake Powell?
Jake Powell, yeah.
I
think Jake Powell ran into him, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. But I think he was the guy who broke. I don't know if he did it, you know, intentionally ran into him or not. But there was a lot of bad feeling about it, and I remember that. But I would. The Warriors. I wish there were more footage of games from you know, some of those seasons, and I suppose you can find the series games somewhere. Yeah,
well, they started the World Series. Baseball started the World Series films, highlight films, in 1943, basically for the troops overseas.
Yeah.
And they always started off, in those years it always started off with the Star Spangled Banner. And but that basically was it. One of the things they said outside of World Series games is 1969 was the first year baseball had a film of a full regular season game. It was their archiving is terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole past basically is lost. All they have are clips and dreads. All the World Series films are available on YouTube.
Yeah, there are clips. Like my cousin has had, I don't know where he got them. Has clips of some. He has clips of Chuck Klein fielding, taking hits off the right field wall in Baker Bowl.
Yeah,
and throwing out somebody on first base on a single, and what would have been a single, taking bounce off the wall and tossing him out at first, and that I don't know where he got. I don't even know if he even remembers where he got it, but there is some old footage, but it's really scarce, and there's a lot of. Seems to be a lot of stuff of Ruth, and I don't know how much there is of other ball players at that time. I really have never seen Hornsby at the plate.
No, I haven't either.
No,
yeah, but I've read enough about Baker Bowl, and anytime anybody puts up a picture of Baker Bowl on Facebook, I put down I said, this was a hitter's paradise. I refer to the Baseball Reference to look at Chuck Klein's splits when he played there. And that's one thing we can do at some point, talk about these quirks of the old ballparks.
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Well, Cleveland was, before they put the fence in 47, Cleveland Municipal Stadium was an impossible place to hit a home run in unless you hit it right down the line, right or left, because center field, Josh Gibson supposedly hit one into the bleachers at center field in a Negro League game, but nobody ever did it in a Major League game.
Because Bill Veck wrote that he used to move the fence when they owned the Indians. He used to move the fences in and out depending on the opposition because there was no rule at the time.
He forced the rule. He forced the rule to be put in. Yeah, I remember him pushing the fences back when the Yankees came in. He pulled them in when the White Sox came in. He pushed them back when the Yankees
Browns,
came.
the White Sox, Browns, and I think Washington came in.
Yeah, he would do it because those guys did not build teams around sluggers because their home parks were not conducive to sluggers, so they built their team.
The worst
gap hitters and
a terrible hitting park was Braves Field. Nobody hitting that place. Yeah.
Left field was. Almost. I know Elliott had to play there, and it's hard to believe that Elliott could have.
Wally Berger, but the thing is, about 35 years ago, I did a project on. I went through, the hitters with the worst batting averages and the pitchers with the worst ERAs every season.
Yeah.
I used the innings, even though that wasn't the requirement. For pitchers until 1951, and tons of pitchers came out of Baker Bowl, and tons of hitters came out of Braves Field.
Yeah,
and that's why I first started learning to take, about park factor, which something I think is very important.
Well, Ford Field for triples, that was great to say, and and the Pirates. I think Kiner broke Johnny Rizzo's record in 1946 when he hit 26. What did he hit?
23.
23. I think that broke Johnny Rizzo's record.
I wrote to the Pirates at one time, asking if they kept records on how many that thing was in until the end of 1953, and I asked that they kept records on how many home runs went in there. And they said no. They said we don't know any idea. And I asked some people in Pittsburgh, but Sabre came out years ago with something called a home run encyclopedia.
Yeah, David Vincent really puts it.
Yeah, so I checked the Pirate right-handed hitters like Wally Westlake and how many were hit at home and how many were hit on the road. They had a player named Dino Rostelli who was a sensation for about 2 months, I think in 1949.
More like
and
2 weeks.
He had 11 of his 12 home runs were hit in Forbes Field.
Yeah. But he came up after they put in Kiner's Corner.
It was Greenberg Gardens and Kiner's Corner.
Yeah.
And when we had were you in Pittsburgh in 1995?
Yeah.
Okay, because I asked Frank Thomas. I said, because they passed the rule that because the Pirates wanted to pull out after they sent Kiner to the Cubs, and there was a rule that you couldn't change the dimensions during a year. You had to wait till the end of the year. So I asked him, what was your reaction when they pulled Kiner's Corner out of the Forbes Field in 1953? He said he cried.
Yeah, I'm sure he did.
Yeah.
I told you. I think I told you once I saw a game there in '47 and had 10 home runs. Most of them were hitting in Kiner's Corner, Greenberg Gardens. Greenberg hit 2 and Kiner hit 3. Freddie Karowski, Billy Cox. The
only film I ever saw that was when the original movie Angels in the Outfield was shot in Forbes Field, and you see that. That's just the only time I've ever really seen anything, a film of that.
Yeah. No.
But getting back to World War II, I mean, the Dodgers signed this infielder who's still alive. He's one of the 8 surviving 1952
Tommy Brown. Yeah.
Tommy Brown, who they signed was 17 years old, and the story was that he hit a home run in some game and won a carton of cigarettes, and DeRocha wouldn't let him take it because he was underage.
Yeah. There were Nuxall was 16 when he pitched. There were a lot of teams. Kyle Scheib was 17,
And they also had a trade. They couldn't trade down south.
Yeah. No.
So,
the Cubs and White Sox trained in Fort Lick, Indiana. And
the Dodgers trained in Bear Mountain Park. I think the Yankees traded West Point.
Yeah. And in February and March up there was snow and ice. And I don't know what they could do up there. Yeah, it probably had a lot to do with who won the pennant. When you come right down to it.
And, of course, the owners are the usual generous modes. When some player complained about what he was getting paid, the owner would say, well, you could be in the Army earning $50 a month and getting your ass shot at.
Yeah.
So that's why after the war, when the Mexican League, people came up, that's why a number of them wound up jumping to the Mexican League because of the money.
Yeah.
That's a whole different topic for a whole different time.
Yeah, but the Warriors, I wasn't really old enough to see understand what was going on. I knew there was a war going on, and it affected, of course, almost everything, daily life, but I knew some of the ball players that Cleveland had during the war. Some of them hung around Cleveland after the war, and I got to meet a couple of them and they had guys like Bill Benness who pitched like one game, and there was a guy named Paul O'Day who had partial vision only in one eye, and would not have played if it had not been wartime baseball.
Wasn't there a pitcher named Cy Peck who was deaf?
Dick Sipic, yeah.
Yeah,
outfielder
Sipek, yeah.
for the Reds.
Yeah, outfielder, yeah.
Tom Sunkel only had one eye.
Yeah.
Pitcher, I think, with the Dodgers, and I'm not sure. I think he pitched during the war.
Yeah, and the Browns had a number of characters. They had this Sig Cookie who they cut there during play five. Yeah, because he was a crazy alcoholic.
Won the pennant clinching game, though.
Yeah, the Indians have an outfielder named Hal Peck who shot off a few of his toes.
He did. Yeah. He played after the war. He was a good pinch hitter. They had him on the 48 team. He was their chief pinch hitter. And he actually played. He played the outfield too. He could still play. Didn't handicap him that badly, but there were guys who, we did have some stuff like
flat
that.
feet. A lot of these things got people out of the draft.
I don't know. Vince DiMaggio played the entire war. I don't know. I don't remember why. I have no idea why, but I don't think he was ever pulled out. And there were a lot of pretty good ball players who stuck around during the whole time. Elliott, of course, and every team had a couple. And Cleveland had Boudreaux, and there were always a couple of guys who somehow made it all the way through, and most of them contributed heavily, and they made the game fun, and they really, and there were, they played exhibition games against service teams, and some of the service games were held in big league parks, service team games, and they really, and then of course what really happened to change the face of baseball in 1943. The All-American Girls Baseball League came into existence, and
I've seen the League of Their Own a number of times.
Yeah.
And I read years ago that the Yankees, Dodgers, and Giants had a three-way baseball game.
I wouldn't doubt it.
They had it. They rotate who was up. They rotate who was taking the field. I guess it didn't do too well because he did the thing once. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was a different era. Okay, I think our time is up.
Yeah, I think so. This has been fun. I mean, we always have fun. I always enjoy it.
I know, because I was obviously too young with that, but I've done enough reading over the years to be able to contribute.
Yeah. Me too. I mean, I did get to one game then, and I was lucky. I don't remember much about it, but I did have read about it, and it certainly was an interesting time in baseball.
Yeah.
And so I look forward to doing it again soon, Al.
Okay, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure. Okay, say hi to Marilyn.
Will do. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
The proceeding has been a comfortably zoned network production. You are advised to keep your dreams wet, your humor dry, your children and grandchildren out of military recruiting offices and off the laps of clerics who wear dresses. Thank you for listening, everyone. Happy trails.